Thank you so much for the introduction. Thank you for the opportunity to talk today. As you're about to see, never shut up about birds. Love talking about this stuff. So thanks for making the effort to come out, and hope you enjoy. Just with questions, if you want to put them in the chat or save them till the end, we'll have some time in the end. And if we don't get to questions, I mean, we're always out birding. Come find me. We'll chat. And yeah. So we're going to be talking today about my attempt to break the record for most birds seen on Vancouver Island in a year. But first, a big part of this big year was highlighting Vancouver Island, what makes it unique, how incredible it is for birds and the communities that make it up. And so I love to use these opportunities to also focus on and get to recognize that last year we officially recognized the Capital Regional District, so Greater Victoria, as the birding capital of Canada. We are officially, by leagues and bounds at this point, have the highest bird list of any county in Canada. This actually started as a bet with my friend Will, and he owes me $100 now because we really trounced Ontario and Essex specifically. So, and then the three birds on the side there are our three most recent: the Siberian pipit 3 days ago from Joachim, the gray flycatcher from Joffre a couple back in spring, and then the magnificent frigate bird from the Trial Island Lighthouse Keeper also in the spring. So yeah, it's not just a fun place to do a big year. It's the best spot in Canada, hypothetically, for birds. So who am I? Why does this matter? Why should you listen to me? My name is Liam Ragan. I have the privilege of sitting on the Rocky Point Bird Observatory board as both a board member and the volunteer First Nations liaison. I've had that privilege for about 3 years now. And as well as that, in my professional time, I work for BC Nature, coordinating the Important Bird Areas and Key Biodiversity Areas program. I know I've been out in the field with many of you doing a lot of those surveys, so that's pretty second to you. But yeah, I'm originally from Vancouver, lived away for a little while before moving back to BC 5 years ago, and I've lived in Victoria ever since, and have fallen in love with Vancouver Island all of those 5 years. So, what is a big year? We'll skim past this because I think for a BCFO audience, you all have a pretty good idea of what big years are. But in case you don't, it's an effort to see as many birds as possible within a given area over a single calendar year. Three of the most popular examples of that, for anyone interested, are the Big Year the movie, Birding Without Borders, Noah Stryker's book as he set the world record for most birds seen in the entire world in a year, and Kingbird Highway, my personal favorite by Ken Kaufman. And for those of you with a little spicier tastes, the new free YouTube documentary Listers did maybe a little bit closer to what I did last year, but also quite different. For anyone who wants any of these resources, I'll be sharing slides and stuff afterwards. So if you miss anything, don't worry too much about it. When I going into this kind of thinking about is this worth doing? What is a big year, et cetera, et cetera. I really love this quote from Noah Stryker when he was doing his global big year, which is, "It was true that my list motivated me to explore the world and measure progress, but the list itself was no more descriptive than a phone book, a crude proxy for the richness beyond numbers or words." That really stood out to me because at the end of the day, it is just a list. It is just some smattering of birds that you have seen. The list itself isn't much, but sort of all of the experiences that represents the people I got to spend time with, the communities I got to work with. Boats got to go out on road trips with friends. That I think was the big year for me. And of course, oops, birding isn't about the wonder of nature and man's search for beauty. It's about finding rare shit and being the best. This is a fake quote, and it feels a little too tongue-in-cheek since he has had his Facebook hacked for a couple days now. David Sibley. He never said this, but I bring this up because you'd be shocked how many people over the course of the year said to me, "Oh my God, is Ann Nightingale going to try and sabotage her big year?" And I have to say, no, not at all. There's tons of birds I wouldn't have seen without Anne. She's been an enormous help to me. So this is just a joke. He didn't say that, and that's not why we do big years. But to set the groundwork, Vancouver Island. The first thing in a big year is figuring out where you want to do it. We mentioned Noah Strecker, who did the world. I, as someone who don't have $200,000 or more, cannot do that. Also, I think that's an insane way to bird. I really like the idea of Vancouver Island because it is a naturally bounded area. It is an island. There are, explicit marine limits to where you can go, rather than political ones. It is an ecological boundary, it is a political boundary, and it is a marine exclusive economic zone. I set my boundaries for mine slightly different than other people's have. For me, I went with If it was the nearest to Vancouver Island, it counted as Greater Vancouver Island. If it was nearer to the mainland, it counted as not. So the photo I have up here, for example, Texada Island, far closer to the mainland. Doesn't matter if anything shows up there, it's not counted. Hornby Island, way closer to Vancouver Island, good to go. Sisters Islets is 1 nautical mile closer to Vancouver Island than it is to the mainland. So, were something hypothetically to show it on that tiny lighthouse, that would count. That actually did come up. For anyone interested, I got to go out and see the Arctic terns that breed there, really strangely. We have, I think now two on and off breeding sites for Arctic terns in the Salish Sea. My friends and I so jumped in a boat, went over there, got to see these, and it was pretty incredible for such a small bird. They completely taken over those islands, and by they I mean a single pair have managed to stop anything else from nesting anywhere near them. And once we saw them, we at a safe distance went snorkeling in the islands, and because it's a rockfish conservancy, it's just full of fish, as many fish as I've seen in my life. And at one point, we were snorkeling, all these thousands of juvenile rockfish just gone. And we're trying to figure out what happened. And I look up, and the Arctic tern is right above my head attacking a California gull, and that had pushed everything out. So yeah, again, kind of these funny boundaries leading to fun experiences like that. So that's what a big year is and where we're doing it. Why now? This map here, if it's going to load properly, yes, shows an El Nino event. El Nino and La Nina are the processes by which major oceanic currents and heat go either from the East Pacific to west or west to east. And in 2024, we had a changeover event where it went from, I'm getting mixed up, but either El Nino to La Nina or vice versa. And those historically have been very good years for rarities. Don't exactly understand the mechanisms behind it, but if you look back at historic lists, these turnover years can be really good for good birds showing up. Another piece, as I mentioned about not doing a global big year, I don't have thousands of dollars to go do whatever I want whenever I want to. This is a flock of surf scoter. My job with BC Nature is very luckily I get to go to a lot of the best places for birds in the province and count birds for a living. And so, with the herring spawns, for example, where I took this photo, I had the opportunity to get to go and bird every single herring spawn on Vancouver Island last year. And so as a result, rather than having to blow my entire budget by March, I had a lot of really good birds in pockets that I got while doing these community surveys. So that sort of is what made this feasible. Also, why now? It was a really good year for birds. In the introduction you heard there, I wasn't planning on doing a big year last year. I'd always wanted to do a big year, but it's a hard thing to commit to. And when January started, we had a lot of good stuff in town. There was the summer tanager there, the one on the bottom right, which I think was only the second or third record for Vancouver Island ever. Had spent at that point a little over a month up by Sydney. We had pygmy nuthatches in town for the first time since I believe '87. And they were with a white-breasted nuthatch. So even beginning of January, it felt pretty birdy. Stuff was going on. And then what tipped me over was about mid-January, as we were figuring out what the year was going to look like. A report came in. Can you see the video here? Is it coming through okay?
Yep.
Okay. We had a hooded oriole show up at a 55 plus community up in Duncan. We actually The only way to see this was my cousin works in a retirement home up in Duncan, very fortuitously. And she was able to, through her contacts with people living in retirement homes all over the Cowichan Valley, find someone who lived in there to get our name through to the homeowner to say, yes, we'll, give you our special VIP. You're not 55 years old pass to come and into this gated community and see this bird. So sort of with that in pocket, on the drive back, my friend Hannah really said, "This is the year. You have to do this." And I completely agreed. I mentioned Hannah. There's me, Ava, and Hannah at one of the herring field sites that I mentioned. The big part about Why Now is also community. I had a lot of friends behind me saying, that they would love to do road trips with me, that they would love to help out, encouraging me, and the time felt right. So there's the Why Now, the benchmark. I love at the beginning of these getting to explain to people that Ann Nightingale is a real name and not a fake bird name that we make up. But you all know Ann, so I don't need to do that. Ann set both the record and the concept of a Vancouver Island Big Year record in 2015 when she saw 269 species. an incredibly impressive number and really set the benchmark for what was possible on Vancouver Island. She also set the tone for fundraising and for outreach, giving numerous talks, raising thousands of dollars, and doing so for Rocky Point Bird Observatory, where we both volunteer, hence the shirt here. So with all that in mind and emulating very much what I wanted to do off of what Anne had done, I set the goals of breaking the record and seeing 275 species, which had been Anne's original goal, raising $10,000 for the conservation work that Rocky Point Bird Observatory does, and raising awareness of some of the groups doing conservation work in the birding sphere on Vancouver Island, the various clubs, communities, and groups who were invested in birds' well-being, and why that was important. So, in sort of rough numbers, and we'll get to the final number at the end, what that looked like was a lot of driving around the island, checking out all sorts of spots. These show every one of those purple marks is a spot that I birded during 2024. You can see a couple trips off the shelf to go look for albatross and such. Many road trips out to individual birds, groups of birds, birding events. We went up to Triangle Island, as you can see on the far north there. In numbers, what those purple dots represent. Let me see. Total checklists. So an important part of this is, again, the list itself is just a list, but when you put it into eBird and collect good data, it's a key part of how we're able to keep track of these species and see how they're doing at a continental and global scale. So the whole year I was eBirding, and that resulted in 1,309 eBird checklists, 1,104 hours of birding logged over those eBird checklists, 3,821 kilometers of birding. So that's not the amount driving. That's the amount of time when I had a checklist going that I was moving. Now, keep in mind, I didn't run 3,800 kilometers, hence the body that I have. That a lot of that was on boats and things like that. And then a total number of birds of 536,659 individual birds reported. And if that seems high, again, a big part of my job is going and counting tens of thousands of surf scoters, and that really helps. So, what I want to talk about today were the highlights of the year, the things that made it worth it, the things that were the funnest, the hardest, the most rewarding. And so for that, I've nominated three of my luckiest ticks, my favorite birds, my hardest chases, and my most frustrating misses. Not in that order. I think it ends with the favorite birds. But yeah. So, without further ado, hardest chases. I'm not going to ask people what they think birds are just because I want to make sure we get through these relatively easily, but feel free to put in the chat as we go. This is a bar-tailed godwit, and the when I say hardest chase, this ended up being a whole kind of Coast Guard adjacent saga. I'd never actually seen one of these before last year, and last year we had one show up at at Sydney Spit, which is Sydney Island, off of the coast of Sydney. Amazing spots, really great spot to bird if you're ever out here. You take a ferry there, and this came through at the end of the workday. And I looked at the ferry schedule and realized, okay, if I leave right now, I can get on the second to last ferry of the day, get there, sprint, see the bird, and make it back for the last ferry out. Otherwise, I will be left on that island all night. Um, I was not the only one who made that realization and went over with a couple other birders who I'm not going to name because of the story you're about to hear. We went over to Sydney Spit, and I told them like, "Hey guys, the tide is coming up. The spit is almost covered. We're gonna have to run, like if we want to do this safely." And they go, "Oh yeah, we should run. That's a great idea." And I'm like, "Yeah, no, seriously, we really need to run." And so as the boat pulls in, I jump off, run across the dock, and look back, and they're kind of talking to the captain, like, "Yeah, we're here to see this cool bird." And I go, "Oh, okay, good luck." And so I get to the tip and it's right there. See it, great views, go, terrific, leave, run as fast as I can. I kind of pass them on the way out and go, you guys really need to go. And at this point, the water is, because as it goes up over, we lose the neck of the spit. When I was on my way out, it was about shin height. On my way back, it was about knee height, getting up to thigh. And I'm 6'1". They were not. They were maybe 5'4". And so at this point, the water's up to their chest level. And I'm saying, like, guys, you're going to get swept out into the ocean, much less catch the ferry back. And so thankfully, the bird takes off from the tip and flies to the main part of the island, and they can kind of not, get swept out to sea. But I get back to the ferry with maybe a minute or two, and the guys there going, "Who are those people you're with? You have to get them on the boat right now." And I'm saying, I'm not really with them. please don't leave them behind. They're soaking wet on an island with no way to get back. And so I have this whole crowd of like 20 people who've just spent the day on the beach just yelling at me like, "You birders, we hate you. We want to go." And I'm like, "It wasn't me. I'm sorry." As they kind of casually walk back, and I mean, thank God the captain waited. But yeah, and then this one showed up later in the year and was incredibly accommodating and spent 2 weeks and didn't require any of that. But the first one was very, very hard to see. Second hardest chase of the year was this American three-toed woodpecker. For those of you who don't know, we have a small population of American three-toed that breed mostly around Strathcona and the central of the island mountains. Uh, like I said, there's not many of them. They're quite hard to find. This one took me about 8 attempts driving up to Strathcona. Now, sometimes that was on my way to other spots. Sometimes that was specific trips for the woodpecker. But this one took me about 45 hours to track down. Many of you will say, Liam, I've been to Strathcona. I found it in an hour. Luck of the draw. I don't know. I did have someone message me a couple weeks after this who was coming from the UK saying, "Oh, I saw you had a three-toed. Like, I'd really like to see that. Oh, I have 2 hours." And I said, good luck. Here's where you can look. But just to warn you, this is quite a hard bird to find. And they had it in the parking lot. They hadn't left their car, and there was one right there. So a very hit or miss bird, but one that's very, very rewarding to finally get eyes on. But the hardest bird of the year in terms of hours spent ended up being this American bittern. Um, for anyone who's seen American bittern, you'll know they are incredibly hard to spot. They look like grass, they love grass, and they hang out in grass because they look like it and love it. And so if they're not moving around, they are nearly impossible to see until they move or make their deep onk call. This one took me 9 attempts of driving to Nanaimo and about, I think, 20 hours of standing around Buttertub's Marsh waiting for this one. And I was actually, again, this was, I think, February. And so it's pretty new in the big year. And I was just, 20 hours thinking like, what am I doing? Why am I spending my time this way? I have a wife at home. I'm going to stand in this cold marsh in Nanaimo. And I was on the phone with my grandma and saying like, yeah, I'm like in the big year, maybe, I don't know. And as I'm about to hang up, this thing takes off and flies across the entire marsh. Like, oh, Grandma, I gotta go and get these photos. And we figured out actually it was flying from sort of a point A to point B really consistently. And so a lot of people got to see it after this, going and waiting at like I think it was within 2 to 3 minutes of the same time each day, flying across that span. But yeah, lots of monotony standing there and watching this until it got the payoff. Some honorable mentions had this lark sparrow. This one, there was one reported in the year on Mount Ptolemy, and I spent hours searching all over the mountain before thinking I saw the bird, getting very excited, trying to run down a hillside to see the bird, slipping, straining my rotator cuff, being in lots of pain, and realizing I had seen a savanna sparrow and not this bird. And then yesterday, after I'd been to lots of physio to figure out what was wrong with my shoulder, the same bird showed up down at McMicking Point and spent about a week there. And I did get to see it there. So again, hard chase. I don't know how you want to define it. Another really fun one I mentioned, shout out to the Blue Jays. For those of you, again, from the interior, I'm sure this is a ludicrous amount of time for one bird. This bird showed up on Quadra Island, which is just off of Vancouver Island, and it took me 3 trips up to Quadra to finally get it. One just stopping in and spending the day, one doing a day trip all the way up from Victoria and spending the whole day watching, and one going up looking for it, spending the night in Airbnb, and then spending the next day waiting. Um, this one also I really love because it really highlights the kindness of strangers. As you can see, this bird is on a trampoline. The property owner here, because this wasn't a private property, I had messaged beforehand and said, "Hey, I heard you have this blue jay. I'm doing this big year. Would you be okay with me coming by?" And he said, "Oh yeah, not a problem at all. That sounds really cool." And so he probably didn't say it was really cool. I probably added that retroactively. But he said, "Yeah, no problem." And so I come by, and he kept bringing me hot chocolate and coffee, and let me sit in his house to warm up every once in a while. And at one point, even his kids were like throwing a slumber party, and I was like, I can leave. Like I really don't want to impose. He's like, "No, no." And the kids come over and ask me about birds, and it was a very kind of hesitate to say, but heartwarming moment of like people care about birds. People when you have a story and an interest in something like this, is if you're not weird about it, they like to talk to you about it. And yeah, he was one of the nicest people I met over the course of the year. Um, so with that, favorite moments. This came pretty early in the year. This is a northern pygmy owl, species 147 of the year. This was one where this wasn't the bird we were searching for. We were searching for a Harris's sparrow. And I was on my way back from Tofino with my friends Hannah and Ava after we were doing some training work for the upcoming herring spawns. And we had heard there was this Harris's sparrow somewhere in Cumberland, and we searched everywhere. We did laps. We checked every suburb or like every little suburb road, fishing, looking for sparrows. Nothing, nothing, nothing. And as it was getting dark, we go, you know what? I don't know. We're just not going to get this bird. It's not happening. It's already pretty dark. And so we go to get in the car, and while from the car and going to pick up our friend who had gone to get dinner ahead of us, stopped by the last bush where we'd seen some sparrows. And I go, oh, that might be, wait, wait. And what I called out as a Harris's sparrow was not. It was this pygmy owl, which had just taken the spot of a sparrow, and from the back really was giving Harris's sparrow, which, exciting in and of itself. We love seeing owls. Our pygmy owls on Vancouver Island are actually an endemic subspecies, which makes it even cooler. And so with these incredible looks at this owl, we're having a good time. We phone our friend Ava, who has all the dinner, and get to watch as she sprints down the road with about three cheeseburgers and quite a few beers in hand to see the owl. We all get to see it, and then as we're enjoying the owl and again about to leave, having missed the Harris sparrow, we hear this chip call in the distance and go, that doesn't sound like a golden crown. I think that might be the Harris's. And so with the dying bit of light, and I mean there is almost no light left, go and find this sole Harris's sparrow hanging out in this guy's yard who was accommodating him, let us be there for a minute to take some photos. This was a felt like a bit of a write-off bird. We usually have, five or six Harris's sparrow a year in Vancouver Island. This was the only one that got reported. So I didn't know it at the time, but this was a very, very good bird to get. And just the combination of it being sort of so late in the day, it being us being exhausted from work, watching Ava get to sprint with all those cheeseburgers made it one of the favorite moments of the year. Another favorite moment of the year, and I still kick myself about this a little bit, is like I said, Ann Nightingale was incredibly supportive of this big year. She helped me find birds. She helped me drive to see birds. She gave me advice on where to be and how to be there, and where to look for rarities, and how to stay sane as I did that. And one bird she helped me get was this hummingbird. Um, we have two hummingbirds that can show up in BC that start with a C, Costas hummingbird and Calliope hummingbird. Those of you in the interior know Calliope hummingbird are quite common. They're over quite a bit of interior BC. They're one of the most numerous hummingbirds in the interior. And this one showed up on Quadra Island. Again, Quadra. What a great little island there. And Anne had found a photo of it in a small hummingbird enthusiast group saying, wow, look at what I found. And so she messaged me saying, hey, there's this really good bird. It's up here on Quadra. You should go for it. I said, yeah, I'm amazing. And I just completely misheard her. I th thought she said Calliope. I even saw the photo and just didn't clock. And so I drive up there on my way to go look for goshawks with a bunch of friends that are in the next one. And I'm driving up with my friend who's come from Idaho, and I tell him, "Hey, I'm going to take the ferry over to go look for this Calliope hummingbird. It will be really good for the island, et cetera, et cetera. Do you want to come?" And he goes, I'm from Idaho. It's our most numerous hummingbird. I don't know if I'll take the ferry. Sure, whatever. I'm here with you anyway." And so we go and we talk to the homeowner, and she's really, really nice. She walks us out to the garden, and we're standing there chatting about, this beautiful hummingbird. And about halfway through one of her sentences, this bird flies up in our face, and both my friend Carter from Idaho and I go, "Holy crap, that's not a Calliope. That's a Costas, which is far, far, far rarer than Calliope. I think this is the 38th record or something for BC. And we got to sit there for over an hour and watch as it fed right in front of us, gave great views, did its display flight. The homeowner was incredibly kind. And actually, working with her for about half an hour, we set up a system of sort of community chaperones, you could say, including Krista, who's here today, who would meet birders at the ferry terminal and take them to her yard to show them the bird without trampling the flowers. And as well as not trampling the flowers, because her downstairs neighbors trained attack dogs for a living. So she said if anyone came in like outside of the hours that were permitted, they could be killed by dogs, which we didn't want to happen. So this was a really good example of, working with community is fun and it's important for seeing cool birds and being respectful and not being killed by dogs. You'll notice there's another hummingbird photographed on there. Despite this being an incredibly, incredibly rare bird, later in the fall, a female Costas hummingbird also showed up in Jordan River. So, if you told me at the beginning of the year, predict what you'll see, I would not have said two Costas hummingbird at all. This is a really, really good bird for Canada, much less two of them. So number one favorite moment actually comes from the same trip. This is, you'll notice, not a bird. My friend Carter from Idaho is there on the right. Ava is behind him. Joachim, and I think that, yeah, Simon. We were camping up at Naka Creek looking for goshawk, which, for those of you who don't know, the coastal subspecies of goshawk is really, really declining. We've lost them across most of Vancouver Island, and they are now shockingly hard to see in most of Vancouver Island. But near Sitka Ecological Reserve, where they still have some really good intact old growth, there are some okay populations. And so we went out here to do some fishing, do some birding, and really look for goshawk. But while we were there, we kept hearing drumming in the woods the entire time. And so finally, we went out looking, my friend Simone and I, who not photographed here, and we found the drumming log that this rough grouse was at. And we thought, this is a really good spot. I bet if we built some kind of blind, we could really watch this. And so all of us photographed here head off into this dense bush and start tying up ferns and putting branches up to create a blind we can hide behind to watch the grouse. And at one point we go, man, it would really be helpful if we had some netting. And I forget which friend looks down and goes, oh my God, look, there's netting everywhere. And someone had left a bunch of like fishing nets in the woods. And so we got to build a pretty good blind. And so we go there and we set up and we, wait quietly for half an hour or so, and the bird just comes out and we're just waiting for it to drum when all of a sudden Ava goes and we're like, Ava, shut up, what are you doing? We just built this blind. And we look up and this pine martin, or sorry, this Pacific martin, is in the tree directly above us staring down at us, and we go, oh my God. And it jumps over our blind and chases this grouse down into the woods, and we go, we just built this whole blind just for a freaking martin to sneak up on this thing and eat it. And so we don't see what happens. We think, maybe it got the grouse. I don't know. And so, we leave and come back a couple hours later and sit there for a bit. And much to our happiness, watch as the rough grouse comes back out of the woods, feels comfortable in its same perch, no Pacific Martin to be seen, and does multiple full drumming displays. I actually got video of this. I should have put this in here, but yeah, and also interesting, I mentioned northern pygmy owl. The ones we have on Vancouver Island are an endemic subspecies. It's the same for our rough grouse. Our rough grouse on Vancouver Island are a unique subspecies only found here. And unlike a lot of other subspecies where it's, oh, the tarsus is 2 millimeters, blah, blah, blah. The rough grouse look quite different. They have quite a bit more dark tones in the tail and wings. And their drumming pattern is actually totally different. If you look at drumming patterns across North America, they all sound pretty much the same. But the Vancouver Island ones have a completely different end to the drum. And there's some who've speculated it could be enough to even justify species status. I'm pretty dubious of that. But I do think it's a pretty cool subspecies. And we didn't see the Pacific Martin again, but that was fun. So those are just some of the favorite moments from the year. Again, if you ask me in a week, I'm sure I'll have different ones. It kind of comes and goes because it was quite the year. But in the interest of time, moving away from favorite moments to most frustrating dips, because I think big years are made up a lot by the stories of the birds we don't see. Um, this is a glaucoskull. I have never spent a year on Vancouver Island and not seen a glaucoskull until last year. We don't get many of them around the island, but they like herring spawns, and they typically you can find one if you spend enough time at a herring spawn. Like I said, a big part of my job is counting birds at herring spawns. And I spent, I think, close to 50 or 60 hours. No, I guess I don't know exactly how many hours. I spent many, many, many hours picking through gulls at herring spawns, both driving up to Qualicum to find one, driving up to Nanaimo to find one that had been reported, working in Heskett for an entire week, counting through thousands of gulls, and couldn't find any of them. And then when I was working in Heskett, I traded off with the next field tech, And had my team in there still. And about 2 days after I left to go, there's one right in front of the house. And it spent the entire next week and a bit there. And I really did the math. I was like, man, can I get back out to the Heshka Peninsula? And realized, okay, I could, but it would cost thousands of dollars. Would totally screw up the field season, and I can't get any of my end of year reporting in if I do that. So I didn't do that because that would have been a really, really bad call. And I really do think, you have to settle your priorities with a big year. And mine was, making sure this job and this community are respected above all else. So did not get to see Glockenskull. Even more frustrating than that, speaking of large white birds, American white pelican. These are a bit of a nemesis for me on Vancouver Island. For those who don't know, they breed up in the caribou, and it seems like that caribou population will once a year or so we get a flock of sometimes up to 50 that will come and go up and down the east side of the island, sort of just killing time until they shoot off to the caribou. And so for a couple of days, we were getting these reports, and I was chasing them all over the island, trying to find these pelicans. And gave me the really good advice of there was this one hill in Saanich where if you went up there with a scope, you could see down into the lagoon at Sydney Spit, which too early in the season for the ferry to be running. And sometimes maybe they would go in there. Tried that, no dice. Tried taking a boat out there, no dice, couldn't find them. And then switching hats to my BC Nature job, our AGM was in Qualicum that year, and I was giving a talk during the main part of the AGM. And unlike today, I had my notes on my phone. And so I'm going through my talk notes with about 200 people there in attendance. And as I do that, I start getting these notifications of the white pelicans are coming to Qualicum. They're coming up the coast. They're over Qualicum. They're over the community center. And I'm trying to get rid of these notifications. Like, I'm in the middle of a talk. I can't do this right now. Please stop. And so while I was giving this talk, the pelicans flew directly over where we were meeting. And had I been able to even just pause the talk and poke my head out the window, I probably could have seen them, but no dice. And I still have not seen them on the island, and they drive me crazy every spring when they do it. But here's hoping eventually. And number one most frustrating, this is a sharp-tailed sandpiper. End of 2023, my friend James and I actually found this bird on Vancouver Island, and we're pretty happy with it. There's usually two reports a year, maybe, of sharp-tailed sandpiper, so it's a pretty rare bird, but they're around. Last year, one decided to go out to incinerate a rock in Tofino pardon me, and spend I think about a week and a half there. And I actually drove to Tofino 3 times to try and find this bird. I think I might be the only person who looked for this out of about 50 or 60 people who did not see the bird. Every time I'd show up and people would say, "No, it's always in this exact pile of kelp. It's right. I can point that. You can see its tracks. That's where it just walked." And every time it was gone. And I would go in kilometers in every direction, walk through the tidal rack, walk through the driftwood, walk along the water line, and I could not find this thing. One of the most frustrating birds of the whole year. Um, but again, kind of a good excuse to go to Tofino. I found a really good ice cream shop instead, and did get to spend some time with some really nice Tofino birders. I'd be remiss if I had said these were the only birds I missed over the course of the year. There's quite a few honorable mentions. A snowy owl that showed up out near Machosin that my friend and I literally went and canvassed the area for, put posters up saying, "Have you seen this owl?" While we were looking for that owl, a little gull flew past Machosin that we weren't out to see. The Broadwing hawk was the most frustrating or most common miss of the year. I kept trying to find one for Mount Ptolemy and thinking, yeah, I'll get one, I'll get one. Then they petered off, and I went, oh my God, and spent 20 hours out in East Sioux hawk watching to try and see a Broadwing, but I just missed it. Did get to see one day 150 sharpshins fly over, which was, a nice little compensation. Red-headed woodpecker, first record for Vancouver Island, showed up on Galliano while my friends and I were diving at the Arctic Tern Islands, and we went out there to try and see it afterwards. Um, and just no luck. We almost ended up stuck on Salt Spring for a night because we mistimed the ferries, and it was a whole thing, but we did not get to see it. Um, True honorable mention. I'll talk about this a little bit at the end, but over the course of the year, Rocky Point started a partnership with Eagle Wing Whale Watching Tours to do bird watching tours to raise money for Rocky Point. And on one of those tours, We had just been all the way out to Port Renfrew. We went to an area called Humpback Alley. There were maybe 40 or 50 humpbacks lunge feeding, all sorts of stuff. One of the coolest things I've seen on the Salish Sea. And on the way back, we've just done it all. We've already been through these waters. And I go, okay, we've been out for like 6 hours. I need to go use the washroom. I'm exhausted. And I go down to the washroom and immediately get this text from Joachim in Jordan River, which we are currently or have just passed, saying there's a Clark's Grebe right in front of Jordan River right now. And, finish up, run to the deck. We've passed it now by a couple kilometers, look around, nothing. And we say to the captain, like, what do you think? And at this point, they were like 2 hours plus over on the tour. And they're like, we need to get back by dark. Like, we cannot turn around for safety reasons. And that one was hard. That was a hard miss. But a really cool tour nonetheless. So that's the hard parts of the big year. We won't talk about car breakdowns and stuck in mud and stuff like that because that's not fun. We're here to talk about birds. Mm. But the final part that I'll talk about, and then we'll have a bit more of a chat and questions and that, are the luckiest ticks. So the birds I was the luckiest to see over the course of the year. This one I was pretty surprised to have gotten. This was an American golden plover. I believe the only one seen on all of Vancouver Island last year. And this one I went out sea watching with Dave Bell, our former head bander at Rocky Point, who now works at Vaso. And he and I were looking at the huge shearwater flux that we've been having lately, and are having again this year. Short tails and all sorts of stuff. And as we're doing it, okay, I'm gonna go grab something in the car. I take a couple steps and we hear this call overhead, this, the weep, weep, weep kind of thing. And I turn to Dave and I go, what is that? And he goes, you're gonna be really happy with what that was. And it was, yeah, this American golden plover. It was the only one seen on the island. It just flew over incredibly briefly. If I had not been standing in that exact spot at that exact time, I wouldn't have been able to chase it. Would have been a, bird gone. But yeah. Second luckiest stick was this Hudsonian Godwit found on May 2nd by Ian Cruikshank. Um, like I said, one of the big benefits of doing a big year and having the job I have is I get to be in a lot of pretty incredible places. We, through a multi-year partnership with Rain Coast Education, have provided capacity funding and myself as a guide for the Tofino Shorebird Festival the last few years. And as part of that, I got to be out there in Tofino with the hotel for a week last year. And so I was, scanning through flocks for any rarities, any good birds, anything that would add to the list. Got some really good stuff like wandering tattler, no sharp-tailed sandpiper, but we do what we can. And I just finished a long shift and was, turning in, and I'm just getting into bed, and I get a text from Ian of drop everything, run now. And he had found this Hudsonian Godwit in full breeding plumage out at Schooner Cove, which for those of you who don't know is about a 4 or 5K walk from the nearest parking lot. And so I immediately throw my shoes back on, run down to the car, drive as fast as, let's say, legal, over to Incinerator Rock, and in a dead sprint, head for Schooner's Cove. I ran into two people I'd been guiding that morning as part of the Shorebird Festival. And as I'm sprinting past, they go, oh, we got these two loons over here. Do you want to help us? And I go, forget the loons, come with me, Hudsonian and Godwin. And they go, oh my God. And they run with me. And we run the whole 5K there, pull up to the bank as you come down on Schooner's Cove and see this bird preening about, 200, 300 meters off and go, yes. And the bird kind of looks around for a bit, takes off, and we had maybe 15, 20 seconds of it, never to be refound. Tons of people checked all up and down all of Long Beach. It seems like after that, it kept on going to wherever it was going. And you'll notice in the bottom right there, not a bird. As I was pumping my arms in the air at having got the Godwit, looked down and found this little red action figure who was also pumping his arms in the air. And so that became a bit of a memento over the course of the year that I kept with me for good luck.
Yeah.
Some honorable mentions of luckiest birds have a rough there on the left. That one was I was driving back from some work in Tofino, and as I was passing through Comox, I got a text of, "Hey, stop driving. You should come right down here at the air park." And there just happened to be a rough, saved me, 8 hours of driving or more, and was right there. The other one was this ash-throated flycatcher. Again, I was coming back from Tofino on work, and I had been planning on spending the night in Tofino and then driving back to Victoria the next day. But this ash-throated got found towards the end of the day, in Comox. And so I reached out to my friend Ava's mom, Tracy, and said, "Would you mind if I crash at your place?" And she said, "Yeah, of course. Would love to have you." And so drove over, and we spent I think about 5 or 6 hours the next morning searching all over for this elusive flycatcher. Wasn't vocalizing, and towards the end, I was starting to think like, I don't know if this thing is going to pan out. If it's not vocalizing and it's not in the spots it's been seen, this might be Dunzo's. But this homeowner comes out and he goes, "Hey, are you looking for a bird?" And I go, "Yeah, yeah, totally. I'm looking for a bird." Um, and he goes, "Well, I haven't seen it." I was like, Okay, well, that's not super helpful." And he goes, "But I have a really good yard. Do you want to come look in my yard?" And I said, Sure, yeah. Why not? Where else am I going to look at this point?" And we go in, and sure enough, he had a really good yard full of some really good broadleaf trees. And after about 10 minutes, the bird flew right up in our face here. And me and Rob were the only people to see it that day. Got brief looks, took a shot, took off, never to be seen again. So that was one where, if someone I'd never met who wasn't even a birder hadn't said to just stand in the yard for no particular reason, wouldn't have happened. So that was a pretty fun one. The ultimate luckiest tick, though, was this green-tailed towhee. Um, I had the privilege of seeing two green-tailed towhees on Vancouver Island in 2023, and so they were kind of on my radar as, a very, very rare bird that could maybe show up. But the days were ticking on in December, the year was coming to a close, and it was one of those birds I put in the, if only column until on December 30th at around 8 or 9 p.m., well after dark, Liam Singh posts to the Rare Bird Alert, "Look what I found on iNaturalist." And someone who was not a birder at all, was not part of the community, had just happened to walk by and take a cell phone shot of a strange looking bird and put it on iNaturalist sort of right as the day was ending. And so, obviously, I know what I'm doing December 31st, last day of the big year. Show up there pre-dawn, sun is coming up. Just me in this area, looking around the holly bushes and see this big green bird pop up at the top of the holly. And I get really excited and I start texting people like, "It's still here, it's still here, come on out. It's right here." And people start coming and I look back up and there's a golden crowned sparrow on the branch. And I go, "Oh my God. I've just misid'd this bird the last day of my big year and I've completely whiffed it." And I'm watching kind of just thinking like, how am I going to explain this to people when the towhee jumps back up and sort of tackles the golden crowned sparrow off it and takes its perch back. And this bird spent months. We were hoping this bird was going to hybridize, but if it had been found a day later, wouldn't account for the big year. So by date alone, this I think was the luckiest bird of the year. So with all that, at the end of the year, we ended up with a total of 286 species to set the new Vancouver Island Big Year record. Number I'm pretty proud of. And yeah, nope. A note on community. I think I've been to a lot of big year talks by people talking about how important, their friends were and stuff like that. I really want to emphasize here, it's not just this was cool. It's not just I like spending time with people. These are the people who made the year possible, both because they found birds that I never would have been able to find on my own that I got to then chase. Also because they ride shared with me, they helped split the driving, they, gave me places to sleep. They showed me, took me out safely on boats to go look for stuff so I didn't drown or get myself into trouble. Showed me how to safely be in different remote areas, brought camping gear, all that. And uh, and yeah, so I owe a eternal debt to the birding community of this island and this province more generally, because pretty cool crowd of people and pretty privileged to get to bird with them. I'd also be pretty remiss without saying my wife, Sophia, long suffering, very supportive of this. Again, this wasn't oh, well, it was helpful. She kept me sane. She is the reason I was able to keep going. And a couple times, especially in the fall, when I said, "Man, stuff's just not coming together," she was the one who said, "You set out on this, you gotta finish what you started," and was really, really supportive. So a huge thank you to my wife. So, what's next? Sleep, recover, still dealing with the shoulder thing from the lark sparrow. Still catching up on sleep in some ways. Circle back. One of the funnest parts about the year was getting, by way of chasing birds to new places or going places to look for them. I got to learn about some really, really cool parts of the island that I would just speed on by as I was looking for whatever bird was the bird of the day. This whole year or this year 2025 has been going back to a lot of those spaces and really digging into what makes them special, why ptarmigan hang out there, why three-toads breed where they breed, why woodpeckers like this one estuary, whatever's going on. And then fundraising. Again, one of the most important parts of the year was to raise $10,000 for Rocky Point Bird Observatory. And I'm very happy to say that depending on how you define it, we definitely raised a lot more than 10,000. And the biggest way we did that was by starting a partnership with Eagle Wing Whale Watching Tours. We ran 8 tours last year, and with Eagle Wing both making a donation for every tour we ran and giving us a percentage of ticket sales, and adding us to 1% for the planet, and just making a donation in total, we well surpassed 10,000 for the year, and also got to talk to something like over 4,000 members of the public about birds, both through those tours and through weekly survey trips when they give us free tickets. That was one of the most rewarding parts of the whole year, and something we've really enjoyed continuing into 2025 and beyond. For anyone interested, I have the link down there. We're doing, I think, as many as 12 or 13 tours next year. So some really, really cool stuff. I'll just give this one highlight of we go out to Smith Island and have had a couple times now both the horn puffin and tufted puffins out there. We've also found snowy plover, had a red-footed booby. It's a pretty cool spot, and it's been really, really good for Rocky Point in terms of just raising funds to be able to do the work that we do. And yeah, so with that, thank you all for coming out today. And any questions?